All right, and we are good. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This is the second training. We did offer one on Wednesday. So again, thank you for coming. You all are fortunate in being the second group because it gave us the opportunity to work out any kinks from earlier this week. So I'm excited to have you all here and to actually be able to demo our product the way we had intended. Just so you know what you're going to see today, we'll do some introductions. Then we're going to go over FERPA, any updates to the 21-22 cycle, our expectations of you, the interview process itself, and that's when we'll be demoing our new piece of technology, how we'll be actually facilitating the interviews. And then, of course, we'll have some time for Q&A. But like I said, please feel free to ask questions as we're going through. I don't want you to think you have to hold your questions until the end. So first, welcome again. My name is Brianna Metzger. I'm one of the assistant directors of admissions. Part of my responsibility here is to help facilitate this process of selecting you all as our student committee members and making sure you are all trained and ready to go. I'm also going to have my colleague, John Hill, introduce himself.
Hey everyone, good morning. My name is John Hill. I'm one of the admissions counselors in the office. So we are so excited to have you here this morning. And thank you so much for being a part of our committee and congratulations. We're happy to have you. I'm going to pass over to Carrie.
Hi, everybody. My name is Carrie Shotwell. I'm the Executive Director of Admissions for PCOM. And I just wanted to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for agreeing to be a part of this adventure. There's a couple of reasons why we asked you to do this. And one of them is because we want you to have the experience of what it's like to select candidates and learn about the interview process so that you can kind of prepare for residency. That's kind of the underlying bonus that you get out of this. The other part of it, of course, is that you are able to help us shape the next class of incoming DO students. Even though you're in a non-voting membership, your words are taken very seriously by the admissions committee. And the fact that you are able to spend and are interested in spending your free time with us in this work is just pretty awesome. So thank you so much. I'll let Bree start her thing.
The reason why I just wanted us all to introduce ourselves is we all share a role in, well, everyone in the Office of Admissions shares a role in the DO process. But in Carrie and John's role specifically, and then I also have another colleague, his name is Joe Tuzzi. They all are really ingrained in the DO process. So I just wanted you to know who they are. If you ever email DOFCA at PCOM, it's very likely one of us are going to be answering your email. So I thought it would just be helpful to put a face and a name together for those of you who haven't met John yet or haven't seen Carrie maybe since you started at PCOM. And so for FERPA, just as you all as physicians have HIPAA, in higher education, we have something called FERPA, which stands for the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. And this protects our students, well, you as students are protected by FERPA, but also our applicants are protected as well. And so one of the documents that you all received when you were appointed to this committee was that confidentiality statement that you received through DocuSign. And basically by signing that form, it's you saying that you would abide by FERPA. There are a couple others that are included in there, but saying that the information that you receive by being an interviewing member of the committee, you are not going to share that with anybody else outside of your fellow interviewer on that particular day. One of the other important pieces of information that was in that confidentiality statement was talking about the recusal process. So we know that as students, you have peers, people that you may know from before you came to PCOM who are going through the admissions process. And so if there's someone who you know very well, and they happen to be assigned to you, we ask that you recuse yourself from that interview. We just want to keep this as unbiased as possible. And so recognizing that there are varying levels of how well you know someone, right? For those of you who went to a larger institution, one of our feeder schools, Penn State or Rutgers, we're going to have applicants who are coming from those schools, and it's possible that you all were students together, but you don't know that person very well since the school's so large. And so you don't have to recuse yourself from a situation like that. However, if it is someone who, it's a very close friend, maybe someone that you worked closely with when you were an EMT, that's when we would ask you to recuse yourself. If you're ever unclear, you're not sure, always just recommend checking in with one of us. And probably Carrie would be the go-to person for that type of situation because she's really facilitating the process of recusals. Discoverable information is in relation to when you're filling out your interview forms. Anything that you put on that interview form, if for some reason a candidate wanted to pursue legal action against PCOM and they requested that they have their interview forms, anything that's on there could be brought into their investigation. And so we want to make sure that the information that we're putting on those interview forms is good information in the sense that it's not anything in which we are discussing any of those protected groups. So when we say protected groups, that's things like someone's marital status, sexual identity or orientation, religion, political affiliation, parental status, if they have a disability. So those types of things we would not want to write on the interview sheet, although it is possible in an interview that does come up, because it certainly has, and there's a possibility that being a part of a specific group is leading them to pursue a career in medicine, but that cannot be a reason for why or why not someone is going to be admitted or not admitted. And so oftentimes the way we talk about it when someone shares a piece of information like that is there have been times where someone talks about like, I have a visual impairment, and I'll be like, oh, thank you for sharing that with me. So why don't you share a time where you had to face a challenge and how did you overcome it? Which everyone, regardless of whether you have a visual impairment or not, you're going to face challenges in your life. And so that would be like a totally appropriate question to ask. And you could write on your sheet, candidate responded to question about challenges by XYZ. This is how they overcame it. That would be appropriate. One of the things that I am asking of you as student interviewers is if there's ever a time in your interview when something just doesn't feel right, if you're concerned about how the perception may have come off for the candidate, always recommend reporting up and reporting out to Carrie. This is to protect the candidate, to protect you as an individual, and to protect PCOM as an institution. There have been times, even where I've interviewed, where a candidate has said something and I got the vibe from the candidate that they were making an assumption about their own response. And so I just had told Carrie about it, which was to my benefit because the candidate they did call and follow up on their interview day once they received their decision. So again, it's all just to keep everyone safe and protected, and you all as students are protected. But also there are times when your fellow interviewer may say something, they may ask a question that's not an appropriate question, that may have made the candidate feel uncomfortable. And also in those times, it's really important that you share that with us, with Carrie again. We recognize how challenging that may be because oftentimes your fellow interviewer is going to be someone in a position of power, a faculty member, a clinician, someone who you might be working with, when you finish here and you're in residency. And so we do recognize how challenging that can be, but also, again, it's really important that you share that with us after the interview has concluded, just so we can document it. And Carrie can follow up with that interviewer and make sure that, they are reminded of the way in which we conduct ourselves in interviews and the appropriate way to ask certain questions. Carrie, is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
No, not necessarily. I guess I'm thinking one of the things that is important for you to understand is that, as a training clinician, right, your job is to learn everything about someone, right? It's important for you to know, for example, who they're sexually active with, right? Those are things that you'd want to know as a clinician. That's not something obviously that you would need to know for an interview. And there are occasions where the student will sometimes mention things that you really don't need to know as an interviewer, or it's part of their story, which is completely valid for them to talk about. You're just not going to ask follow-up questions around those things that they bring into the room. So, the room, the loose room here that we're in virtual world. But yeah, that's kind of the one thing I just wanted to drive home is, it's very likely that a candidate will bring up some things that really are important to them and their story and maybe why they want to be a clinician, like Brianna said. But those follow-up questions are really something that you cannot do. And the example that Brianna gave of a question you can ask instead, that's kind of around the circumstance, but not about the circumstance. And that way we're saying, thank you again for sharing your story with us. And then you just move on to the next thing. So hopefully that's clear. And, we can talk about examples and that kind of thing in the Q&A.
One of the things that I didn't mention on Wednesday that I'm thinking about now as we're having this conversation is the decision-making process when someone shares something like that. So you all sign technical standards as students here. And as in those technical standards, that's when if you need accommodations for any reason, you would answer the questions a certain way. It would go to someone else and they would figure out whether or not, they can reasonably accommodate a student. So in the event, going back to the visual impairment, that cannot be a part of your decision-making process. That is not for committee members to decide, oh, well, can this person see while they're suturing? Would this person be able to see if there was, a rash on someone's skin? That cannot be a part of the process. You would make the decision, the recommendation, based on the responses to the interview questions. And then if that person is admitted and chooses to enroll, they fill out the technical standards accordingly. And there's a whole other process for that. So that's something I also wanted to touch on. Hasn't happened a lot, but there were a couple questions about that. I remember in another program a couple of years ago. So again, just wanted to make sure drove that part home as well. So updates to our 21-22 cycle. You should have all received an email from our Safe Colleges module to complete training on microaggression, bias, and then also there was an interviewer training. So if you haven't already completed those, please do so. You don't have to send proof of completion to us. We're able to monitor that. But again, I just wanted to remind you to do that because you will not be able to start interviewing until you've completed those trainings and also signed your confidentiality form. Also, we're going to be doing virtual interviews again. We're going to be using Google Meet as our platform to conduct those virtual interviews. And we're also going to be doing blind interviews again. So we were blind last year out of pure necessity. We didn't have a way to safely share application materials, securely share application materials. And also they had been doing they'd been doing blind interviews on our Georgia location. So in order to keep things the same across all locations, we did blind interviews. And so you as interviewers will not have access to any of the materials, the application materials, letters of recommendation, MCAT scores, grades. It's all based on what the candidate says to you in the interview. So I also want you to know that just because you will not have access to their materials, there is another part of the process, and that person will be doing a full deep dive of everything that they present in the application. So there are two pieces that come together before the decision is made. It is your recommendation as an interviewer. It is the reviewer's recommendation. That's the person who's doing the full file review. And then that together equals the decision. So when we go to committee and we discuss the candidate. Carrie, I just saw you pop in.
Yeah, sorry. Like, how do I let you know that I have a thing I want to say? I'll just go on camera. Yeah, so one of the things that's important for us to share with you is that it's out of the list of things that you really can't ask. One of them is, what are your grades? What are your MCATs? You're not really supposed to ask about those metrics because in a blind interview, you're not supposed to know them. However, what I will say is sometimes the candidates will share that information with you organically. And if they tell you a little bit about their MCAT journey, for example, and that they had, 400 or 495 on the first attempt, it's okay for you. It's fodder now for you to ask a question about it. Maybe not, what was your breakdown or anything specific like that, but more, tell us how you prepared the first time you took it. And then when you decided to take it again, how did you prepare differently? What you're evaluating is not the score, right? What you're evaluating is the methodologies that they utilize, the thought process that they utilize to navigate that particular part of the process. Okay, so I just want to make sure I mentioned that. Definitely do not ask. They will certainly sometimes share with you, I went to Penn State and I was a biobehavioral science major, and that's great. You can note on those on the record that they shared those things, but you really can't just flat out ask them. And that's an important part for you to know as well. Thanks, Craig.
Yeah, and I think that that's part of the repetition of you serving as an interviewer. You will get to understand, how do I ask these workaround questions that gets to the point of what I want to know. That's just one of those things that you will get to become, by one, shadowing. You'll see how your fellow interviewers are asking those questions, and then just the frequency of participating in interviews. Another one that people normally will open up with, like, their stat profile. So again, you're like getting that information, but you don't want to explicitly ask questions about that. So yeah, that's a great point. I don't think I mentioned that on Wednesday either. Our expectations of you as interviewers are that you are dressed appropriately. Yes, we're in a virtual space, but I would still ask that you are in SP attire. You don't need to wear your white coat. You certainly can if you want to. But again, appropriate dress, at least from the waist up. Please log in prior to the interview starting. Again, that would be logging into Slate and then also pulling up your Google Meet link. This way, if something's not working the way you think it should, you have time to troubleshoot that, give us a call. In terms of technology and space, we ask that you are logging in either through a laptop or a desktop with a webcam. We ask that you not use like an iPad or a tablet or a cell phone. And also we ask that you're in a quiet and private space. If you have a roommate or you are in a shared space, please just put in your headphones. That interview is confidential. So we want to make sure, again, we're not breaching any type of confidentiality between your interviewers and the candidate. Are there any questions about anything I went over so far? Okay.
Hi, Brianna.
Hi.
Hi, nice to virtually meet you.
I know.
I do have a quick question. You had the slide, which talked about the different modules we had to complete on Safe Colleges. And
yes.
I think I emailed you or I can't remember who. It was basically asking if our completion of the microaggressions module would be sufficient, because a lot of us, when we were transitioning from second year to third year, had to do it during our I2C course. So I just wanted to follow up and find out, is that module still sufficient, or should we just complete a new one for admissions?
I think so, Carrie.
So this happens with our faculty too, right? Because annually people are supposed to complete the microaggressions and bias training modules in Safe Colleges. And so some of the faculty are like, oh, I did it last December. I'm like, yes, and it's annual, so you have to do it again.
Yeah.
But if you did it within the last, like we've been saying, month or two, then you can actually email Marcela Montijo, who will kind of pluck that module off. But if you haven't done it in the last few months, it is something that we ask you to do again. It should be the same module. I don't think what you're doing in ITC is different than, yeah, I think it's different, or the same, I mean. So if it was done very recently, then yes, you can ask for this module to get plucked off.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Sorry for the delay on that response.
No, that's okay.
I have a quick question as well about the modules. So like I saw on the slide, it said implicit bias and microaggression, but it also said interviewer training. I just wanted to make sure that that wasn't something I like missed, because I don't see like an interview training on safe colleges.
I was just going to say that, yeah. So this is actually the training, and then the recording will go on for those who didn't attend. And I have to actually kind of pluck out who did attend the event and then who didn't. So it's for those who weren't able to attend any of the sessions. We actually do have a G site that we created last year, and we had recorded a training over the G site, and I think that's what your slide was referring to last year, but we didn't do that this year. We were doing just live Q&A.
Thank you.
I'm making notes to myself. All right. So on to the interview portion. Scheduling yourself, you will receive an email from me on Monday containing a Google Sheet link with how you'll schedule yourself. So for our returning students, this isn't anything new. This is exactly how we facilitated the process last year. In the far left side, you'll see the date and the time, whether it's in a morning or an afternoon session. Our afternoon sessions always start at 1, and our morning sessions will start at 9. All you need to fill out is that tan row that says student interviewer. So you'll take student interviewer out and you'll plug your name in. You have to complete 2 shadow shifts before you can serve as a non-shadowing member of the committee. So as you can see here, Justin had to do his second shadow. So I ask that as you're scheduling yourselves for shadow shifts, you put your name and then whether it's your first or your second shadow shift in parentheses. That way we know and we can keep track. If we have 2 interview sessions on one day and you want to do the morning session and you want to do the afternoon session, those 2 sessions can serve as your first and second shadow shift. For our returning students, you do not have to do shadow shifts again. Nicholas, did you have a question or did you accidentally hit that? Maybe it's an accident. If you did your shadow shifts last year, you don't have to do them again. However, if you are a returning student and you didn't do your shadow shifts last year, you have to do them this year. So again, you must complete 2 shifts before you're able to interview as a non-shadowing member. We like to keep the teams, especially in a virtual space, we really are trying to keep them to 2. There will be a third interviewer in there just as you're doing your shadow shifts. But those interview teams are a combination of an admissions representative, a clinician, a PhD basic science faculty member, and then of course a 3rd or a 4th year medical student. And so once you plug your name in on that Google Sheet, we're going to lock the cell. So if you do have to remove yourself, you're going to need to send us an email. We understand, especially my 4th year students who are going through the residency application process, that there are going to be times where you put yourself on to schedule, but then you have the opportunity to do an interview. Just let us know. We do ask that you try to give us, at least a few days notice, but also understand that sometimes emergency situations occur. And so we ask that you send an email to GO FCA if there's anything that changes in your schedule. I know that there was a question that normally pops up about how many interviews you must complete. We don't put a specific number on it for you as students because you are doing us, as Carrie said, a huge favor by serving as committee members. And your number one priority is being a student. But I do ask if you're able to try to interview at least 3 times a term. That's, once a month. Any time that you can give us, we are so appreciative of. And so kind of just keep that in mind. Also recognizing, again, you're students and you have responsibilities. And I don't want you to skip out on your rotations to serve as interviewers. But if you happen to have time in your schedule to interview, of course, we'd love to have you.
I have a question about that.
Yeah.
So, how far in advance do we have to sign up then? Because as like a third year rotating student, our schedule changes month to month, and sometimes we don't even have our schedule for like the next day. I'm basically getting my schedule day to day because I'm on a surgery rotation, and surgery times change. So like a 1 p.m. start, if I get out early, I could totally do that. But I don't know when I would know that by.
Yeah.
So I know there are Saturday interviews, so that's basically what I'm going to shoot for, probably for the most part, unless I know for sure. But I guess, say I did get out early one day, and like, would there ever be a last minute spot or not really?
Yeah, so we understand that it's really dependent on the rotation. Like things like surgery, that's a different type of experience. But we often see when our students are completing like their family med rotations, radiology, things that are like slightly more like stable in the timing commitment. So I completely understand. Don't worry about it. If you happen to have availability, like let's say it's that morning, you see we have interviews going on, you can just give us a call at our main line, 6700, or you can always send an email to FCA, but probably calling if it's day of, you'll get a quicker response. And just say, hey, I'm available. Do you have any openings for interviewers? And we'll just let you know from there. I do ask if you're able to give at least a couple weeks notice, because we can't move forward with scheduling candidates for interviews until we have a full interview team. And so what full team means is we need 2 full interviewing members. So that would be any of our student committee members who've completed their shadow shifts, or then any other member of our committee. And so what I like to do is I like to have floaters on, just in case emergencies pop up for anyone who's interviewing. So if you're ever in a position where the morning of an interview, you happen to be free, just let us know, and we'll see if we can fit you in or not. But yeah, I mean, if you can try to give us at least a couple weeks notice, that way we can get candidates scheduled. But again, we recognize that with some rotations, that's just not going to happen.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. So actual interview process, after you've told us that you wanted to interview, you will receive an email from us that looks like that screenshot over there. It'll say, Dear Megan, you've been assigned an interview on that day. Just an FYI heads up. You will also receive a Google Calendar invite. As you see here, there's that sample interview day. That gives you an idea of like what the session timing looks like. But you're going to receive a calendar invite for that 1 to 4 block of time. In that room, there will be a Google Meet link, and that is the Google Meet link we're calling the debriefing room. So for you and your fellow interviewers, you will go into that Google Meet link to talk about the interview. We don't want you to have that conversation in the same room that you just interviewed the candidate, because if they came back in, they would be privy to that conversation. So you'll be going back to that one chunk of time. So again, you'll see that on your Google calendars. We'll be sending that out to you. But the individual interview links, that you will access through Slate. So you will see in the next slide, I'm going to do a demo, so you'll get to see what that looks like. But this is kind of like notification, the beforehand, this is what you'll expect. It'll be the email and also Google Calendar notification. Again, we talked about what to do if you need to cancel. Please just send us an email letting us know. And then day of, you will check in to your interview room at 1 o'clock. You'll meet your interviewer, do a little hi, hello. I'm Brianna, nice to meet you. If you want to talk about the questions, like how you're going to break the questions up, you might do that in that time as well. And then your first interview will start at 1:15. So, we do have the interviews themselves are about 30 minutes long. We have a 15-minute buffer in between. And the reason why we have that buffer is to account for if the interview runs late, maybe it started late, there were technical issues, to give yourself a bio break before you go to the next one, again, to talk about that candidate with your colleague. So really try to keep the interview, and this is the responsibility of the person, like the lead interviewer, which would be like an admissions rep or one of our other faculty members, clinicians. It's really their responsibility to stay on time. But just so you have it in the back of your head, this is a 30-minute interview with our candidates. And then you do have that buffer window. So Slate, you've heard me say it a couple times. I don't think I've actually said what it is. So Slate is our new CRM, which is a customer recruitment management. Oh my gosh.
Relationship management.
Relationship. I've said it so many times. Like my brain is not working. And basically what this is it is a all-in-one place where all of our applications materials are living in there. We are sending all of our emails through Slate so we can track to see when candidates are opening their emails, or they can access their PCOM portal through here. They can upload new materials through here. It's like this really beautiful experience for the candidate. And that way they don't have to go through a bunch of different places. Everything kind of lives all in one spot. And then for us as users, everything lives in one spot. So it has been a big lift. We've been implementing this since, we started the process last summer, and we are very, very close to the end. So we are all very excited in admissions to be unveiling it to you all. The very first thing that you'll do is you'll log in. This is the URL right here. Again, this is one of those things I'll send out to you in the email. I strongly recommend bookmarking it. That way you don't have to go digging through your email for the URL. You're going to log in using your PCOM username and password. And then you also have to use Duo. So you all know it's that double authentication system. If you've tried to access My PCOM when you're not on campus, it asks you if you want to send a Duo push. So it's going to be the same way to access Slate. You have to use Duo. But the nice thing about Slate is it's a web-based app. You don't have to be on campus to use it. It's nice. Everything is all in one place. And so if you tried to log in right now, you wouldn't be able to do anything because we haven't activated your accounts. Just so you know, if you were trying to play around, we will let you know. I mean, you'll be able to access it on the day that you've been scheduled. But we probably will be turning everything on that day for you individually.
Actually, I think that the accounts are actually live.
I think
Aaron activated them on yesterday. So actually, you might be able to try to log in. But I'm not sure if the emails went out to let them know they could. I don't know, but I think they're active, just FYI. So if you try to get in and you get in accidentally, then it's okay.
Yeah, I think if you all logged in, you wouldn't be able to see anything anyway because you haven't been assigned to an interview. So you would just see the main home screen. But I'm going to switch gears real quick because I'm going to do a live demo, which I am very excited about. Oh, now I have to do Duo because I've been dormant for too long. Okay. All right. Share again. Okie dokes. So this is the screen that you'll see after you've logged in. Let me make that a little bigger for y'all. So this is the screen that you'll see after you've logged in and you've done Duo. It'll bring you right here. This aspect right here, it's just like feeding in from their social media, so you don't really have to worry about it. But the very first thing that you're going to want to do is click this big red link that says click here to see your interview schedule. I'm recommending that you open it in its own tab. because you'll want to navigate back to like this homepage. So it's just easier if you open it in its own tab. At this point, you're going to click the Run Query button. And what this will do is it'll tell you all of the candidates who you are going to be interviewing on that day. So normally we have 4 candidates who are interviewing to a particular interview team. For testing purposes, we just had 1 set up. But it'll, in theory, have all 4 candidates listed there. If you only see 3, there's a possibility that someone was a no-show or a cancel and we just couldn't fill the spot. So I would say if you do happen to see like only 2, that's probably when you want to give us a call. There might be something not working correctly, and then we can say, no, there are really only 2 candidates that day, or, oh, let's look into it. So this is really why it's to your benefit to log in early, just so you can make sure everything is working appropriately and you're all set up the way you need to. And the reason this goes back to why I recommend keeping this open in its own page is just so that you can always have your list here. I mean, if you wanted to write down your 4 candidates on a piece of paper, you could, but everything lives here so you can have it open. So today I'm going to be interviewing Helena Ravenclaw. Go back to that other page, and what you'll do is you'll click on what we call the reader. It's the 3rd button from the top. You'll click the browse button, and you'll see a bin called scheduled interview for today. Let's see if I can make this a little smaller. Okay, so the reason why it's important that you have all of those, why you have this is because there could be a day where we have 8 interviews happening. Okay, all 8 interviews are going to be listed in the bin. Who are the 4 that I'm responsible for? So that's why we have that other, we call it a query. You can call it a report. That's why we have that there. So I know that I want to interview Helena Ravenclaw. I'm going to click these sheets of paper over here. And this is what we call the interview dashboard. You can see here, it says, if you have any technical difficulties, please reach out to us. Honestly, phone call is going to be your best bet, just because it'll be immediate. We always have people on the phones and they can forward you to Carrie, John, myself, Joe, anyone who's able to help you. And then what you see here is a Google Meet link. This is the Meet link for this individual interview. So this is my link only for Helena Ravenclaw. If I were to have, if I was also interviewing Salazar Slytherin, he would have an individual interview link. So that's the thing that's really nice. Everything lives right here. This right here, it says click to view the interview schedule. That's this one. So you can still access it from this. I just like to have it up in its own tab. I can keep it there the entire duration of the day, and I don't have to keep running it again. You will see the interview instructions. Gives you the scale of 4 being superior, exceeds expectations, all the way to 0 is deficient. And then these are all the interview questions. So for my returning students last year, you were used to receiving in that Google Calendar link, it had the rules. There was a sheet for you to fill out the interview responses. There was also the interview questions. Now everything lives here. And we have it set up to be randomized. So even though you might have these questions on this for this candidate, on my next candidate, you're going to have a separate batch of questions. It's all randomized. And it's one of the really nice features is, again, everything is living right here. So next, what you want to do is add to queue. It'll say, are you sure you want to add it? You say yes. And what this does is this gives you the ability to complete the interview form. On the bottom right corner where you see review form sent to bin, click that. And this populates the interview review form. So again, for those of you who are returning, there is no more separate PDF form that you have to complete. There's no more sending it to us via email. Everything lives on this single platform. And what I would recommend to you all as interviewers is, as the interview is occurring, you can go ahead, you can make your notes, whatever you want to say. There's no character limit, so you can just keep writing your responses in there. And then you'll want to assign the different rating scale. So again, the rating scale is listed right over here for your reference. And then you'll just go through, and it auto populates here at the end for what the overall score is. So it says, all right, our overall score is 14. In this box is where you make what we call your overall recommendation. It's kind of a nice summary of what the interview was. You can say whatever, I don't know. Or something like that, whatever. And then this is where you're making your recommendation. So again, remember that the interviewer recommendation plus the reviewer recommendation equals a committee decision. The discussion is had, and then they make that formal decision. So you can either say that you want to accept, if you're accepting someone, hey, do you want to recommend them for scholarship? Yes or no. Accept hold. That means that you're going to hold them either for grades, for MCAT scores. This is probably going to be more of something that we would use like admissions wise, since we would know a little bit more about that applicant. Waitlist is exactly what it sounds like. And then you can pick high, medium, or low, or deny. You don't have to put anything in this text box, but I strongly recommend using this text box here. And it's important that you include notes in this interview form, because when we go to committee, we read what you wrote. As students, sometimes our students are a little harder even than our faculty and our clinicians. So we take what you say into consideration, and it does play a role. So I don't want you to think that even though you're not at those committee meetings, that your voice isn't being heard. It certainly is. And that's why it's really important that you fill these forms out. All right, so this person, good question. So we found that, I guess I should say what the question is for recording purposes. The question is, do we have to ask all 10 questions? And so it really depends on the interview itself. We found that before there were only 5 questions that we were asking, or no, there were 6 questions that we were asking. And for some interviews, even after asking those 6 questions, asking follow-up questions, making up questions on the fly, the interview itself still wasn't lasting 30 minutes. We still weren't finding out what we had hoped to learn about that particular candidate. So we decided to offer 1 and 2 questions for each area. So you don't have to ask all 10 questions. Definitely would, you need to ask at least 1 question from each section. But, again, if you feel as though, even however the person answered the first question, if you feel like that you didn't quite get a good response or a good enough response and you want to ask a second question, feel free to do that. But that's more why we added it there. And not all candidates. I've had times where I've had to respectfully cut off a candidate because they just were spinning. And I realized that we had only asked 2 questions and we were already 20 minutes into the interview. So again, that's something more that your lead interviewer would be facilitating. But to your question, you do not always have to ask all 10 questions. There are times where you will need to ask all 10 questions. Yes. Yeah. So we used to ask a question about academics. And since we are not assessing them, we, meaning the interviewers, are not assessing candidates, since we don't know their academic record, we took that question away. Okay. After you make your recommendation, the next spin, it's always going to go here. There's not anything that you have to do. I just wanted to show the drop down. And then it saves automatically. So let's say, which I am strongly encouraging you to fill this out in your 15-minute window between interviews. Only for the sake of, we can't move this person forward until all of the interview forms are returned or are submitted. So I am not recommending coming back to it. However, if for some reason you have to come back to it and you didn't send it yet, all of your responses are saved. So I'm going to leave, going to come back in. And look, everything that I already typed was there. So again, my recommendation to you is to take those 15-minute windows to complete and submit the form. But if for whatever reason you have to come back, everything is there. And then when you're ready, you've typed all of your boxes in, you hit the send button, and poof, it's out of your queue. This was from an old test record, so. And that is the process. It's pretty straightforward. We had a couple of people asking, about doing paper notes. The only way to submit things is electronically. So you can, in theory, as the interviewer, be making notes on your in your notebook, but you would still have to go through Slate and submit the response. I look at it as you all are going to have to do electronic charting as physicians. This is kind of just extra practice for you. One of the things I got around to doing last year was telling the candidate, just so you know, you're going to see me typing. I'm making, comments on your interview form. I don't want them to think that I'm doing something else. So if you want to say that in your interview, if you're going to be filling out the form as the interview is being conducted, feel free to do that. Are there any questions about what you just saw? Yes. So the student interviewers and the lead interviewers, they do have the same questions. So even when I say it's randomized, I mean it's randomized to that specific candidate. So if myself, Carrie, and John were all interviewing Helena Ravenclaw, we all would have had the same set of questions. You're welcome.
Bree, I just wanted to add a comment about the paper notes. So if you are, sorry, I have a frog in my throat. If you are that person who has, taken paper notes, if you're that person who likes to kind of scribble and not type, and you go back in and fill the form out and send it so that it's submitted, the paper form has to be destroyed. So you can burn it, you can shred it, you can have your dog eat it. We don't care, but it definitely has to be destroyed because that is now, information about a candidate, an assessment of a candidate outside of our system. So please make sure if you do take notes that you shred them.
And yes, this recording will be made available to you. And then we also have like a step-by-step guide with screenshots. So whatever is best for you from a learning perspective, you can always watch this back again. Probably what I'll try to do when I send it out is include a note about the timestamp where the demo starts. That's actually a really good tip. And then you'll also have that paper guide.
We can probably have Danny edit the video too, so it's just the Slate training, so it's shorter. Good question.
I saw a question in the chat box. Going back to when we sign up to interview, when we're shadowing for the first two, are we with another student who will be asking questions? Are there two students signing up for those slots? So in theory, there could be a student who already completed their shadow shifts, and then you are there completing your shadow. So there would be two students, but one is like a full-fledged member. What we would not have is two students who are completing a shadow shift in one interview. Does that answer your question, Harrison? So when you are shadowing, you will be able to fill out forms. I would know that's, we would, myself, Carrie, and John, we would know who was just shadow and who wasn't. But if you're in that interview form, If you wanted to make a note on there that you were a shadow, that would be helpful. But your voice, even if you're a shadowing student, we're still taking those notes into consideration when we go to committee and everyone's like, oh, what did the interviewer say about Helena? And then I can say, oh, well, Carrie said this and Brianna said this and Harrison was shadowing, but here was his input. So it's all still a part of the process. So yeah, you would still fill that form out.
I have a follow-up question about the shadow shifts.
Mhm.
So when we're shadowing, we don't ask questions, we don't talk, we just watch, correct?
So yes and no.
Just because they're going to see that we're in there is
Right.
so, like,
Yeah. And that's the thing, right? It's like awkward if you're just sitting in there and you're just like, the expectation is that the other interviewers are leading and facilitating the process, but there have been times where the interviewer, like the lead interviewer, is like, oh, I have a student here, student Dr. Megan, would you like to ask one of the questions? So yeah, I mean, it's not an expectation that you as a shadowing student actively participates. Dr. Lanuti is always good for just throwing you in there. Just get in there and do it and try and learn. But yeah, your cameras would need to be on. You certainly would introduce yourselves. You could say, hi, hello, I'm shadowing today. I think this is a conversation that happens, in my opinion, in that debriefing room. And you would say, like, I'm comfortable. I'd like to ask a question if you're okay with that, or I really would just like to sit back and observe today.
okay. And then a follow-up to Harrison's question. So will there be 2 slots for students to sign up, or if a student already signed up, but we're just shadowing, are we kind of allowed to add a box because we're shadowing? I know you said you can't have 2 shadowers.
Yeah.
But if like a student has already signed up for that interview and we want to shadow it.
I'm going to pull the form up so you can see what it looks like, because that might help.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Carrie, do you want to? I saw you unmute yourself.
I'm just thinking out loud. So yeah, there's a couple things. So one is that for interviewers, even if you're shadowing, is a little overwhelming to the candidate. So we try not to do that. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. There was something else I was going to say about shadowing. What the heck was it? I lost my train of thought. Sorry. I'll come back to that.
Okay. So this is the actual sign up for this cycle. So we try, in a perfect world, which does happen sometimes, we actually have 4 interview teams going at once. So even if there was a student who filled out their name here, we could have a student put their name here and then these other slots as well. But if you already see that someone has put in, here, I'm going to do it so maybe it's helpful to see. All right, so let's say I'm going to move Dr. McGinnis over here, and then I'm going to put, we would still need it could be a student. It could be a student. We as admissions people are going to be facilitating this process. So all that I ask of you is that you just fill out your names in those little tan boxes. We'll make the adjustments, and you can always check it here to kind of see what's going on. But in theory, there could be an admissions person, a full already done shadowing student, and then a shadowing student. So that could happen.
Please also note that we might move you around, right? Right now, this is what the schedule looks like, but in 2 days, we might get a bunch more people that sign up, and then we decide, oh, you know what, Dr. Lanuti is better to match with this person. Like, we try to make there be as much diversity in like clinicians, male, female. Like, we try to make the interview teams kind of a good match. And so if you put yourself down and you're like, oh, I want to interview with Dr. McGinnis, it's possible that we'll move you around. So just be aware that who you put yourself in on the day you register won't necessarily be who you end up with. And there will be, opportunities where, Brianna can't interview today. I'm going to take her spot. I'm now your partner instead of her. So there's a lot of movement that occurs in the back end.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? right.
Yeah, I guess one other, sorry, Bria, I was just thinking about what was the other thing I was thinking about. When Brianna was mentioning that you have that debrief room, you're going to go into that room first before the first interview, just to check in with your interviews, like interviewers, just like Brianna said, introduce yourselves, make sure you're on the same page, who's asking what questions. If you're in your shadow shift, you can ask the interviewers who are responsible, who are leading, say like, is your expectation that I'm going to participate outside of introducing myself? And then you can say, I'm not comfortable. Please don't let me ask any questions. I just want to watch. And they'll honor that. The other thing is, if they do ask you, yeah, go ahead, go ahead in the middle of the interview, even though you've said, no, I don't want to, just say, oh, no, you can go ahead and peel off, right? The other thing is, if you do decide, and it's been agreed that you're going to ask a question or two, stick with the question bank, questions only, not follow-up questions as a shadow. You don't know yet, and maybe you do from other experiences, or maybe you intuitively know because some of you are really brilliant and intuitive that way and kind of know what's the right thing to ask, or what you can see is not being answered that you want to poke a little bit more on. I would ask that you not do that just yet, because that's part of the interviewing skill piece that you kind of pick up as you have more interview ease to assess. So the first day you're like, okay, I didn't even really know what to expect. And now I have an idea, like what's a good interview? What's a real bad one? And sometimes the interviewers that you're partnered with will say, gosh, that was a really bad one. That was a good experience for you to have a bad interview. So, what bad looks like. So just stay away from asking those non-scripted questions when you're in your shadow space. And even when you get past shadow and you're in the regular interviewer role and you're like, okay, I got Dr. McGinnis as my partner and it's just the two of us. If you have a follow-up question and you're not sure if it's appropriate to ask, just don't ask it. When you go into your debrief room in the next, before the next interview, you can say, Dr. McGinnis, when that candidate said X, I really wanted to ask as a follow-up question, why? And he'll say to you, the other interviewer will say, that's a really good follow-up question. I would say it's okay to ask that. Or they might say, I know you really want to ask that, but this is why we don't. And they'll explain it to you. So know that part of the training process will kind of help you along. We're not going to just throw you in the room and start, making you do stuff. There are some interviewers who are a little bit more, they're more confident in what you can bring to the table, and they'll just throw you in. But just, again, make sure you tell them, like, please don't, I'm not ready for that. Or I don't feel like I know what to say yet. And again, they should honor that. So, and if you have somebody who doesn't honor what your request is, that's when you would call me and say, hey, Carrie, just so you know, I went in and this person, I told them I didn't want to participate, but they threw me in and they asked me a really weird question. I didn't know how to answer it, and I'm a little stressed out. And this happens sometimes. If that's the case, let me know so I can make sure that interviewer knows, like, hey, listen, the student interviewers, they're still learning. Just, cool your jets. And they will. So just want to throw that out there.
The last thing I wanted to say, and then I'll let y'all get back to your Saturday. One of the things that I did when I started interviewing and learning about this process, I would make little notes to myself about those follow-up questions. Because a lot of times we're asking the same follow-up questions. And so if there's anything that you're like, wow, I really like the way that interviewer phrased that follow-up question, feel free to jot that down for yourself, and then you have that for the next time. A lot of times a follow-up question I have to ask is, especially if they didn't really answer the question, the follow-up to that is, as a reminder, this is the question. Can you try answering that a little differently? So yeah, it's just helpful to have a little cheat sheet of follow-up questions for yourself. And I think that's it, unless there are any other questions. Feel free to reach out at any point, send us an email, give us a call. We're here to help you. We're very grateful for the time that you're able to give us. And again, I'm really excited about this cycle. It should be really exciting. Slate is awesome. It's going to make our process so much easier. And again, just excited to have you all here. So enjoy the rest of your day, and I will see you soon.
Bye, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thank
Have a great
you.
weekend.